and welcome to In Conversation with WLV Doctoral College. I'm Dr. Deborah Curitan and I work in research and development in the Doctoral College at the University of Wolverhampton.
And I'm Dr. Ben Halligan, I'm Director of the Doctoral College.
We've been doing a series of vlogs about the various chapters of the thesis, and we're kind of nearing the end of those series of vlogs. So today's vlog is going to be about the conclusions, the recommendations and the references. So three important sections, but the things that often get skipped over at the end and are often things that examiners pick up on and comment on being rushed. So Ben, what would your advice be?
I think a conclusion doesn't have to be particularly long. And I think if you've already drawn out the discussion in respect of the results, then it can simply be a matter of restating these things. I don't think one should be scared of restating, but then looping them back to the initial research questions, even back to the title of the thesis. Because many examiners will first look at the maybe bits of the introduction and the kind of general research questions, then look at the methodology, and then they'll read the conclusion, and they want to see something that is a good circle. That what you say you're going to do, you have done, and then you stated that you've done it, and then you confirm that what you said you would do, you have done. Whereas the other thesis, that's just like a line that kind of drifts further and further away from the research questions, is obviously something that they won't look so favourably at. So I think, in my response to your question would be not to be scared of being summative, and to return to the foundations of the thesis to make sure that everything is squarely aligned.
But even though it's short, it needs a lot of thought. So it might be one of the shorter chapters in your thesis, but it really does need to show that higher level of synthesis, that higher level of criticality of your own work. You're not shooting yourself in the foot by saying with particularly around the criticality, but it's about that in your discussion you'll start to position your work to the wider field, and the conclusions give you that opportunity to talk about that in a much more critical way.
For sure, and it could be that you're in a position to offer a radical revision, a radical rereading of various ideas already in the field, which perhaps you would suggest that there's a legitimate foundation to do that, but not do that yourself because it's outside the scope of the thesis.
Yeah.
So in that respect, the conclusion can sketch out the relevancy of the results to the disciplinary field.
Yes.
And raise further questions, and those further questions would be questions for another researcher who may be drawing on your work. I mean, there's nothing better than someone who's doing a PhD finding an article or a PhD thesis that suggests that the area they're looking at is one that needs legitimate investigation, because it's a confirmation of what you're doing. So the conclusion can therefore begin to mount something of a suggestion of a way forward. I think the thing it shouldn't do, and I have seen this done, is begin to bring in new original material.
Yeah.
I think the time for that's gone. And if something's turned up that needs to be talked about, bang it somewhere else. Don't suddenly say.
That goes into the discussion.
Yeah, for sure. So, a new set of results or data must not be kicking around in the conclusion.
Yeah.
The other thing you can do in the conclusion is perhaps talk about the limitations of the study in a positive fashion, that I was only able to look at the sample groups from these geographical regions. If the same approach was applied to another region, would it be similar, would it be different, things like that. So you can begin to address the limitations of the study in that respect.
But also, from what you're saying, you're starting to set up the next section of the thesis, which is the recommendations. So for professional doctorates, that's recommendations for practice. For PhDs, that's recommendations to the field. And those recommendations can be to a number of different people. So that might be recommendations for further research, recommendations for policymakers, recommendations for practitioners, or different levels of practitioners. But you should see a clear link between the recommendations that you make and your research findings, your discussion of those research findings, the conclusions you make as a result of those, and then the recommendations that you make.
I mean, some theses will have, as part of an outcome, which might be included in an appendix, for example, a very concise policy document to relevant parties, so that would be drawing on, obviously, the thesis, but wouldn't have PhD talk, citations, data sets, but it would be, further to the study. We recommend the following in respect of the following laws or policies or areas of good practice and things like that.
Because sadly, the days have gone where you can do a piece of research for the sake of doing a piece of research. Research on the whole is funded by the general populace, so therefore we need to be making a difference with the research that we make. And this is one of the areas in which you can prove that your research has the ability to make a difference. And that's starting to look at the, what we then go on to talk about as academics, as researchers in universities, the impact that we make with our research. That's the start setting the seeds to make impact with your work. So it's a good idea not to rush that section either, is to give it some thought about how you can make a difference, what that difference might be, and then what you need, who you need to speak to, who you need to influence as a result of that. So that's where your recommendations are aimed at, those people who can influence the area.
I mean, because the conclusion is at the end, often it can be rushed.
Yeah.
And I wonder, have you come across in Vivas examiners expressing frustration or disappointment or concern at a rushed conclusion? Have you found that?
Yeah, lots of theses that I've examined, not all of them, but there have been some where the conclusions are rushed and you think somebody ran out of time. And as examiners we kind of understand that, but it's almost, if I talk about quite often about your thesis being the story, being the novel of your piece of research. And if you were reading a novel and then the last line was, and they all lived happily ever after, goodbye, because you'd run out of time. You hadn't got the time to actually tie the story up and tell the readers what happened to the protagonists in the story. You'd be highly disappointed. So think of it in that way. You don't want to disappoint. And
it needs to serve the work that you've done and serve the thesis, and it's a shame if...
I mean, in the example where, there's been a really good thesis, but the conclusions are rushed because somebody's run out of time, that becomes a recommendation for change. We're not going to fail a thesis. We're not going to fail somebody because they've rushed their conclusion. But it's, you get to the end of it as an examiner and you think, rather than, whoa. And what you want to do is to leave your examiners on a high. You want your examiners to be left thinking, wow, this is really powerful. This is really good. This can make a change. And if you do rush those sections, you do leave your examiners feeling meh about things.
I mean, I've had, as an external, sometimes I've been frustrated that the work that's been successfully done suggests revisions to certain disciplinary practices or what have you. But the researcher hasn't put this in the conclusion, and you want to ask them to big up their work a bit more by returning to their disciplinary field and saying, what I've now done shows you there's another way of thinking about this, that a set of assumptions in operation maybe shouldn't be in operation, and In fact, this relevancy, maybe you should stand on a podium and shout about it a bit in the conclusion.
Yeah. So the final bit that we're going to talk about in this blog are the references.
Yes, how would one go about setting them out? That's the question, isn't it?
So every university will have a recommendation for style of references. It's often, for Wolverhampton, it's discipline specific. So at levels 4, 5, 6 and 7, we have a particular style that we ask everybody to utilise, but at doctorate we utilise the style of the field. So that might be APA, that might be sort of Vancouver, is Vancouver style?
Well, there's for science thesis, often Chicago would make more sense in terms of references. For humanities, social sciences, Harvard would make a lot more sense. It kind of depends within a science thesis, it may simply be worth noting a certain academic paper has validated this approach so that it can sit as a footnote.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily then need to wind up in a bibliography. So
my advice would be to not leave it to the end, because actually going through and checking your references, you need to make sure that everything that you've cited in your thesis is in your reference section, and everything that's in your reference section is cited in your thesis. And don't underestimate how long that's going to take, and don't think that your examiners aren't going to check it out either, because we will randomly, some examiners will go through and check them all. Some of us will do kind of random checks. We'll say, okay, go randomly pick sort of 30 or 40 references and check that they're either in the reference list, or if they're in the reference list, that they are actually cited in the paper, in the thesis. So don't underestimate how long it's going to take you to double check that. In my day, when I did my PhD, which is probably around similar time to you, the software to help you collate your references wasn't available, and you literally had to sit there and type them. And it took me a whole week to sit and type my reference section. So do collate your references as you're going, and use the tools that are available to you, because those they make life so much easier.
But there will still be stuff that you're not sure how to reference.
Yeah.
So there could be a load of anonymous stuff, or stuff written by committees.
Or things that you've utilised from the grey literature, or things that you might, in some fields, you might be going to various press.
Or there may be online news articles where there's no author attached, and so there's stuff like that. There's also questions of how you reference maybe a tweet, or a TV program, or a radio program, or a YouTube source. So there's all these other ambiguities. If you're, quoting from Hansard, bits of parliamentary discussion, you need to include the volume and the column and all this kind of stuff. There's also, very irritatingly as well, I guess, where you wind up with an author whose work you're using a lot might have two sources from the same date.
Oh, this is one of the things that really annoys me. So you have, so if it's, Jones 2018 A, Jones 2018 B, that's fine, as long as you've actually used both of those references. What makes me really angry when I examine a PhD is where you get Jones 2008 B and there's no 2008 A, and that says to me that they've not read the original paper, that they've cited it out of another paper.
Or that they put it in and then took it out, but forgot to change the AB thing, which is understandable.
Yeah.
Or that, the other one is when you suddenly find a third thing from Jones.
Yeah.
So you've got a C in there. But then you might have confused B with C. If you're doing it in date order or alphabetical order, this determines which is A, which is B, which is C, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what used to be A suddenly becomes B as another reference is put in. So it's very easy to make a mistake.
But that's where you use the search, isn't
Yeah.
it? Search and change, to find and change at the point that you do that.
But even then, some sentence that you may think was in article, the first article may have been in the second article, so that. Anyhow, whatever. So I just think one should give a bit of time to validate those.
You do need to go back and double check all
Those
of
ABCs, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the other thing is, I suppose, around consistency, because you'll always have some aberrations, like you'll have maybe forgotten to italicize the title of something or other, or maybe for some sources you've put the translator in, but not for others. Is a full stop after each one of them, you know. It really is detective work sometimes to find out. Plus, I guarantee you'll have lost a reference.
Yes. You always lose at least one reference that you need to go and find.
That's right, so finding that reference can be quite difficult.
So do give yourself enough time. Don't think the references are something that you're going to do in a couple of hours. That it's definitely not. You need to give yourself at least a week with your references.
But the reference section should be quite, something you in a way almost enjoy doing, because it does show the scope of the enormity, the contemporaneity of the literature, but also, look, we've gone back however many years, so in a way the reference section is an interesting index of the quality of the thesis. And you yourself will learn, I think, from the reference section, the kinds of sources you're drawing on might show really where you're coming from as a researcher, as a voice. This is actually, this is my constituency, this is where I get my ideas from and develop them from these people.
Yeah, and I think it's really useful to do that, because one of the questions that some examiners like to ask is about, okay, where are you going to publish? And if you can say, the majority of my work, what I've drawn from, is from this particular journal, so it would make common sense that that's the journal I start, I start to target. So, tips.
Ooh, I like what you said, don't assume you can do it in one afternoon. Give yourself a discernible period of time to take all the messy references to fine draft.
Okay. And my tip would be, don't forget to sell your research and the really good work that you've done in your conclusions, and make sure that you align your recommendations to the work that you've produced. Okay. So thank you for listening, and as always, if you enjoy our videos, please do subscribe to our channel, and also you can subscribe to notifications for when we release new vlogs. We release new vlogs every Friday, and we're always interested in hearing what you'd like us to talk about, so do give us some suggestions in the comments below. Thank you for listening, and we'll look forward to speaking to you again. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.